Hello and welcome to our talk on Skomer Island for the 2000 season. My name is Leighton and I'm the warden out on Skomer Island. I've been the warden for the last 4 years and I've spent 7 years in total on the island. Throughout this talk I'm going to take you through some of the sort of wildlife highlights as well as some of the breeding seabirds, and I'm going to talk you through some of the sort of infrastructure projects we've had going on the island as well this year, from work parties right through to some of the building works through grant funded projects as well. At the end of the talk, Rob is going to take over and Rob is going to talk about some of the events and visitor side of things on the island as well. So we moved out to Skomer on the 28th of February this year. It was a real treat to be back out. Like I said, I've been out for 7 years in total now, and I can remember pretty much every moving out day and the first days I've stepped onto Skomer every season, and I can certainly remember every trip up and down those steps, carrying all of our kit. Obviously this amount of kit takes a long old time. We've got various bits of food and clothing, as well as bits of guttering and things like that to repair any damage that's been done over the winter. It certainly takes a long time and you're pretty knackered by the end of the day. But often when you're doing this, you've got ravens flying over and chuff calling, and this year indeed we had guillemots and razorbills on the cliffs behind us as well, sort of gargling away, and it was so nice to be back on the island itself. One of the things that we noted when we first moved out to the island was actually how green it was and how much vegetation there was on the banks around the island. And you can see in the foreground of the photo here, there's actually green tufts of grass coming through the ground. So this is usually dusty soil and stone, especially in the summer. I've not seen big tufts of grass like this coming through the ground at Sails Point. And this is shown quite well in the following photo. So this is two photos, one of which was taken in 2023, and the right-hand one was taken in 2024. So you can see the difference. They're pretty much the same location and the same bank. On the left, you've got some tiny little bits of grass coming through, but the banks are completely void of any vegetation, pretty much. And on the right-hand side, it's covered. It's basically like a jungle compared to previous years, and it was a massive difference to what we were used to from the last couple of seasons. It's better for the island in terms of strength of the burrows, so the seabird burrows will be stronger with the vegetation holding them together. Also prevents sort of soil runoff as well. We were seeing in previous years where we had heavy rainfall, we were seeing a lot of this soil just washing away with heavy rainfall. So it's really nice to have a bit of grass back there as well. Potentially not all positives, and we'll go through one of the potential negatives later on when we're talking about some of the breeding birds as well. So the nice thing about moving out so early, sort of late February, and having a leap year is that we get to move in, we get to unpack our stuff, and then we get to get out on the island as quickly as possible, and we get the sort of very early March, late February, beautiful light on the island with the sort of slightly stormy sea coming through and clouds just parting with the sun behind. It's a stunning time of the year to be on the island itself. And it's a time of year that I just absolutely love going out and doing laps of the islands. This is taken from the lantern looking over towards Midland or Middleholm, depending on what you want to call it. And we were walking around the island, and there were signs of sort of the island was waking up, really. So this is over towards Pigstone Bay. It was nice to note that there wasn't much damage on the buildings themselves, which enabled us to get out and see what some of the breeding species were doing. The 28th and 29th of February this year were really good for guillemot and razorbill attendance, particularly the 29th. We noted pretty much near full attendance on the cliffs, which was amazing to see. Just the cliffs covered in birds, and the island felt a little bit like the middle of summer, although it was a bit colder and some of the vegetation hadn't come through. But it was a really special time to be out on the island, and signs that the island was waking up. And indeed, whilst we were doing some of these early walks around the island, we were finding signs that some of the birds had already gone with it. So ravens were already on eggs, or at least a couple of the pairs were. And as we were walking around in early March, we did have a couple still nest building, but there were pairs already on eggs at that time. And some of the birding was starting to pick up as well. So unexpected things like this bullfinch on the 6th of March here. It's not a particular rarity for the island, but it is a bit of a scarcity. I struggle to remember whether I've actually seen one on the island before or not, but it was a real treat. And actually, unbeknownst to us, it was one of 2 records. We had a second one later in the season in December when we went out for a day visit, and there was one down in North Valley. So yeah, always sort of a few surprises around, and nice to be out birding at that time of the year. But again, we can't spend the whole time out sort of surveying wildlife and looking at nesting behaviour. We do have the island to get ready for visitors, and we have an early Easter this year, which means we open a couple of days earlier, which can often be a little bit of a pinch point. So yeah, we were getting buildings ready. And ready for the work party, which was arriving in late March. Now, one of the main jobs for the work party this spring was to finish off the project at Morrimere, so repairing the old boardwalk, or not repairing, so replacing the old boardwalk and the set of steps that lead up to the hide there as well. I must stress that the left-hand photo is not actually the boardwalk people had to walk along to get to the hide. That was buried beneath the old boardwalk, so I guess that was the old boardwalk. But we took both out, put some new boardwalk on, and then, like I said, repaired the steps up to the hide there as well. And with a project that we were doing this autumn, which we'll touch on later on, Morrimere is going to look really good for the coming years, and that boardwalk is going to last a long time. On top of work party work, we also have quite a large grant to spend this year. So we were lucky enough to receive money from the UK government as part of the Shared Prosperity Fund, or originally part of the Shared Prosperity Fund, which meant that we could do some work on the buildings that really needed doing. So this is the back of the Warden's house. The windows at the top are the library windows, of which there are 21. So we replaced every single window within the library. If you've been in the library in the last few years, you'll notice that actually the windows aren't doing a particularly good job. They're doing a very good job of ventilating the place because of how many gaps there are in the windows, but yeah, they don't keep the weather out anymore. And whilst they were doing that, they found that the back wall of the Warden's house here was rotten. So we had to replace that as well. So we've taken the wall off that, replaced it with new OSB and insulation behind, and replaced the windows as well. So in total, there were 23 windows and a load of cladding that's gone on there as well. So yeah, really big project. This is partly done in April time, and the rest of the project, which is mainly work at the farm, is going to be undertaken in the autumn, which we'll touch on in a few slides' time. So the summer itself, or the spring itself, was beautiful as ever. As you can see, the bluebells were in full bloom. This is actually one of the sort of least dense patches of bluebells on the island. Obviously, up towards the Garlandstone, it gets far denser. But it was a really spectacular display of wildflowers all across the island. So we had a really fantastic display of scurvy grass on the slopes of Pigstone Bay here, the best one that I've ever seen. And some fantastic displays of thrift as well on the neck. So this is over towards South Castle Beach Cave on the right-hand side, and looking over towards the South Pembrokeshire coast here as well. It was really spectacular, and just the island really felt like it was in sort of full bloom this year. Also fantastic to see was the Northern Lights from Skomer. This was in early May, 10th of May itself, looking over sort of St Bride's Bay and up towards Ramsey Island on the left-hand side as well. It was really spectacular to see. Obviously, when you see it through your eyes, it doesn't quite look the same as looking through a camera, but it was pretty phenomenal, and it was good enough to wake everyone up on the island. and get them out sort of sitting under the stars for the night. It was a night that we'll remember forever. As we get into sort of full-on spring, through this time you've got lots of the birds starting to sing, territorial behaviour, nesting material being collected, and the island does really come alive. You've got blackbirds collecting nesting material. You've got dunnocks collecting nesting material as well. And you've got oyster catchers, the appearance of oyster catchers on top of the island. So during March and April, we have large roosts of oyster catchers down at South Stream and the Wick, and sometimes in North Haven as well. Can be over 150 birds at times. And then slowly but surely, these birds make their way up. They pair up and they make their way up onto the island. And all of a sudden, the island is covered in 70 odd pairs of breeding oyster catchers. That's a really fantastic time, and it really signals the start of the true breeding season for lots of species as well, which is fantastic to see. You've also got stone chats out and about on the top of the bramble and bracken, keeping an eye out on the females, which are incubating the eggs below. Always ever vigilant, the stone chats. You've got buzzards on eggs on the nests. This is one on the neck here. Oh, this is a pair of buzzards on the neck here. And then as we get into the main breeding season, you start to see chicks as well. So this is a peregrine chick sat in a nest at the Wick. So this is, if anyone did come to Skomer this year, this is a nest that was super visible, super accessible. It was right opposite the main path of the Wick. Quite amazing that they chose to breed there, really. But it gave visitors a fantastic view of breeding peregrines. It was almost like being in a town where they're breeding on a church, and you could just have a scope set up on them all the time. You could stand at the Wick and you'd know where they'd be pretty much all of the time. This was actually nesting in a what I want to say is an old raven nest, but it's technically not really an old raven nest. It was a raven nest from this year that the peregrines ousted and then moved in, raising this chick. And this chick fledged in late June. One of the peregrines was actually ringed. And it was an adult female that was ringed as a nestling near Tregaron in 2022. So it had moved about 110 kilometres to come to Skomer to breed. And it was holding territory the autumn before. I just wasn't able to get a read on the ring. I spent a little while chasing it around with a camera, but never any luck. It was always too sharp for me and too far away. But luckily this year, whilst it was nesting, we managed to get a scope on it and read it whilst it was sat out on the cliffs. Also, whilst the breeding is going on, you've got migrants still passing through, of course, as well. So on the 4th of May, for example, we had a glossy ibis, originally found on West Pond. It then spent the rest of the day and the following day around West Pond, and the bullhole wet flushes out that way as well. I think that's one of the benefits that we had from the sort of very wet summer that we've just experienced, is that those wet areas potentially drawing in birds like glossy ibis and also spoonbill. So we had spoonbill on the 18th of June, one of a few records this year, and this was roosting with lesser blackback gulls out on that wet flush at West Pond as well. And on the 25th of June, we had a woodchat shrike just down in North Valley there. This is the second one in the last few years that we've had quite late in the spring and into summer, really. We had one a few years ago, which was seen in early July. Okay, so we're going to have a little look at some of the breeding birds in a bit more detail now. So curlew, they were nesting. There were 4 pairs of them nesting on the island this year, and they did actually manage to fledge some chicks as well, which was nice. So on the 15th of May, we did a little curlew watch where we sat out and staked out all the curlew territories and tried to work out what was going on with them. And on that day, we had a brood of 4 chicks down east of the farm in the fields there, and some chicks just south of the farm on Gorse Hill as well, which was fantastic to see. So in total, the 4 pairs, they fledged 3 chicks, So that's a pair fledging one chick each, apart from one pair which look like they failed. Short-eared owls then. So short-eared owls we have 3 pairs of them this year. It's the same as last year. We're not really sure how many chicks fledged this year. It's difficult to be absolutely 100%, but we did see a couple of fledglings down in the valley later in the summer. Chough then. So we had 7 pairs of chough, so the same as last year, and most of the same territories were occupied again. Productivity was not particularly good with chough. I do wonder whether, when we were talking about some of this vegetation growth earlier, I do wonder whether some of that has an impact on the feeding that the chough are able to do. So around the island, you often see them feeding on the sort of bare coastal slopes or the short sward of the coastal slopes. But this year there just wasn't any of that. It was really thick, dense vegetation, and physically difficult to sort of break the surface of the root structure by hand, let alone if you're a chough. So I do wonder whether that's affected their productivity. Like I said, we had low numbers fledged this year compared to what we've had the last few years. On to seabirds then. So I put this photo in because I think it conveys the sense of challenge that we feel at the start of the seabird season. So this is the Skomer boat in the bottom right hand corner, and this is Bull Hole on the left hand side. Now thankfully we don't have to count Bull Hole from the boat, we can do most of it from land, but we do have sections where we have to go round the corner and count the continued guillemot and razorbill colonies from the boat, because you can't see them from anywhere on land. And I just thought this photo with the scale of the cliffs and the boat in the bottom right hand corner just conveys the sort of sense of challenge that we face. And this is what it looks like from the sea. So you've got Bull Hole, the little inlet on the left hand side there, and you've got the guillemot and razorbill colonies with fulmars and kittiwakes mixed in there as well. Interestingly, there's a little cave in the bottom centre of the photo there, which we did have chough investigating for a short while, but again it seems to be too low for them to breed in, really, not too far above the tide line, and with any waves it would get washed out quite readily. So puffins then. So puffins we actually count in March, we don't count them in the summer. Due to sort of weather and also puffin attendance at the colonies, we only managed to get 1 count of puffins in this year, and our count this year was slightly down on last year. We don't think this is really a true reflection of what the population is actually doing. From what we saw, sort of observations of some of the attendants at the colonies through March and April, it did appear that they were as busy as ever before, if not busier than ever before. So it still looks like good news for the puffins. It's just a factor that we were only able to get 1 count in this year, and the weather conditions and the puffin attendance just didn't quite line up for us this year. I just put another little photo of puffins in, just in case you like puffins. Razorbills then. So razorbills had an increase this year after having a bit of a decline last year. It was pleasing to see them sort of increase again to their highest levels that we have on record. Guillemots. The guillemots, they declined quite significantly in 2023, but had a slight upturn in the numbers recorded this year. So hopefully that's showing some signs of recovery after a big drop 2 years ago. Fulmars then. So as you can see, the fulmar population dropped quite significantly this year. This is a similar pattern to seen in the last few years, and it's one of concern for us. We're not really sure the reason behind this decline, but it has happened before in history. So if you look at the mid-2000s, or the late 90s, they did go through periods of decline then before rising once more. So hopefully this is just a period of decline and they are going to rise again. But it's something we're going to keep a close eye on because the rate of their decrease over the last couple of years has been really quite significant. Kittiwakes then. So Kittiwakes had a slight bounce back this year. So after having had a bit of a poor year the year before, they were back up over 1,500 pairs this year, which is great news in the modern terms. Historically, they were over 2,500 pairs at times. So we're still short maybe 1,000 pairs of where we were in the late 80s and early 90s. But it's pleasing to see them have a bit of a return in numbers this year just gone. Herring gulls. So herring gulls have declined a bit more this year, and they've had this sort of slow and steady decline over the last few years. Lesser blackback gulls. So lesser blackback gulls have seen a bit more of a decline again this year. Great blackback gulls. So great blackback gulls are very similar to last year, and just a pair more this year, I think it was. So we're now into autumn then. So we've gone through the seabird season, we've gone through the breeding bird season. We're now calculating the number of birds that we think have fledged from particular species, and we're starting to move on to some of the sort of more building works that are going on this autumn as well. But like I touched on earlier, the grant that we were lucky enough to receive in the start of the year paid for a large amount of building work, stuff that's needed doing for quite a few years now. So this is the dump shed at the farm, and it's full of things ready to go into the hostel and staff accommodation as well. So you've got 2 kitchens here, you've got 3 bathrooms, there's a new cooker, and there's lots of lime there as well. And the lime we'll touch on in the next slide. So here, this is the hostel kitchen, with the kitchen obviously ripped out. This is a main job of the work party in the autumn. And we also took out all of the pointing between the stones as well. So when this was originally built, it was filled with cement pointing, which isn't breathable and not suitable for stone-built houses like this. So we took all of that pointing out and have now replaced it with lime, which should lead to a breathable alternative and allow these walls to breathe over winter and over summer, which means we should get less damage on the walls and less mold growing on the walls and the ceilings as well. So once the work party had finished prepping for building works, so that was mainly ripping out the kitchen and taking out all the pointing, and also taking out the bathrooms and the pointing in those rooms and the upstairs corridor as well. They moved on to other tasks. So this is Morimere Dam, and the photo on the left-hand side is the dam in spring, or the mere in spring. The photo on the right-hand side is the mere in autumn, after it's just started to refill. And during that, between those two photos, the Morimere completely dries out, vegetates over, and you don't see anything on it for roughly 3 months of the year. The reason the Morimere dries out is because the dam has some quite large cracks in it, and the water just drains right through the dam, goes around the sluice gate, and drains out the other side by the Hyde there. So the main work this autumn was to dig out those cavities, fill them in, and cover them over with concrete as well, sort of reinstating the dam structure on the island. This was on both sides of the sluice gate as well, and the wall that holds the sluice gate up was also pretty fragile in places as well, so that was sort of pinned back in and held together. And this was the result, really. So this is Morimere in December. So when we went back out for that day visit in December, just to sort of check on the island after storm damage, I went down to the mere and found this completely full up and almost up to the top sluice board as well. So really fantastic to see, and just those two repairs to the dam really made a world of difference. And that's everything from me, really. I'm going to pass on to Rob now, who's going to go through some of the visitor side of things and a few other bits and bobs and the projects that we had going on the island. If anyone does like or would like to ask any questions, then you can email me on skomer.warden@welshwildlife.org. I'll be more than happy to answer anything that you might have questions about. Thanks for listening.